I was halfway through a cold beer on my back porch when the call came in. My Uncle Jasper had passed. We weren't close, hadn't seen each other in years, but apparently he'd left me something. The lawyer's voice crackled through the phone. "Mr. Xavier Maddox, your uncle left you 500 acres of land just outside Fair Grove." I nearly dropped the bottle. 500 acres. Free and clear, no liens, no encumbrances. I've been grinding away in a 2-bedroom rental for 5 years, trying to keep my mechanic business above water. 500 acres sounded like winning the lottery. Until I drove out there 2 days later and realized something was seriously wrong. The GPS dropped me at a pristine metal gate with a fake stone wall and a big brass sign. Crescent Ridge Community, HOA managed. Beyond it, rows of luxury homes, pristine sidewalks, a community park with a duck pond. I looked at the deed copy in my hand, then at the gate camera blinking red at me. A clipped voice came through the speaker. "Can I help you?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I'm standing on my land." The pause, then the voice came back sharper. "This is private property, sir. If you don't leave, I'll call security." I told them to go ahead. Maybe security could explain why there was a whole subdivision built on land I just inherited. The gate buzzed open real fast after that. I hadn't even stepped out of my truck before she was marching across the lawn toward me. Pastel tracksuit, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, clipboard held in both hands like a weapon. She introduced herself as Deborah Van Holt, president of the HOA, and told me she found it highly unlikely that I owned anything in Crescent Ridge. I pulled out the deed copy I'd printed from the county records and held it up. Her eyes moved across it. Her face went pale. She recovered quickly, told me there was obviously a mistake, that the subdivision had been there for over 8 years, that they'd invested heavily in roads and utilities and landscaping. I said, "I'm not confused. You're all living on my land and you didn't even know it." She huffed and told me their lawyer would reach out, and could I please leave because I was upsetting the community. I glanced around at the homeowners stepping onto their porches to watch. "I'll leave when I'm ready," I said. Then I turned and walked into the middle of the street and stood there for a minute, letting the full weight of it settle. They had built their entire HOA kingdom on land that wasn't theirs, and now they were going to pay rent. The county clerk's office was quiet that Monday morning. Dusty ceiling fan, a woman behind the counter typing with one finger at a time. I leaned against the counter while she pulled up the parcel history. When she turned the screen toward me, I read it twice. The entire subdivision sat on parcel 82B. According to the records, that parcel had never been sold. It sat under Jasper Maddox's ownership until his death. Property taxes had been paid every year from a trust account he set up 15 years ago. Nothing changed until last month, when my name was added. "So you're telling me the HOA built an entire community without buying the land?" She squinted at the screen. "No record of a sale, no lease agreement, not even an easement filing." I let out a slow whistle. She looked at me over her glasses. "If I were you, I'd get a property attorney. This is going to get messy." I already knew it. That afternoon, I walked into the office of Carla Dominguez, a real estate attorney I'd worked with years back, when a client tried to stiff me over a classic car rebuild. She had a personality like a wrecking ball and a memory like a steel trap. When I finished laying out the documents, maps, and tax records on her desk, she was already pulling up case law. "Holy hell," she muttered. "They built on top of your land without a title transfer? That's not just negligence, that's fraud. Permits, zoning variances, utility hookups, all of it would have required proof of ownership. So what does that mean for me?" "It means you've got them by the throat," she said. "Unless they can produce a valid deed, they've got no legal claim. And based on these records, they've been collecting HOA dues from people living on stolen property." I leaned back in the chair. "So what happens next?" "We file a quiet title action, officially confirms you as the sole owner. Once that's done, you can negotiate leases or pursue eviction. But prepare for a fight. These people have lawyers and they're going to scramble." I told her I didn't want to displace innocent families, but I wasn't letting the people who built this thing get away with it either. "Good," Carla said, because someone inside the county permitting office must have helped them cover this up. You don't build a gated community without someone signing off on documents that were never legitimate. 2 days later, I went back to Crescent Ridge, not through the front gate, but walking the tree line behind the golf course. I wanted to feel the land, understand its boundaries, see the scale of what had been built on top of it. What I found at the southern edge stopped me cold. Just past the last row of homes was a fenced lot with a generator shed, security cameras, and a locked utility box. The fence was new, fresh concrete post bases, no weathering on the metal panels. A sign read, "Private property, HOA maintenance access only." I pulled out the parcel map I'd gotten from Carla and checked it against my position. That fenced lot sat outside the subdivision's approved development zone entirely. They were storing infrastructure on land they hadn't even attempted to disguise. I photographed everything. The next morning, Carla filed the quiet title action. She submitted everything: deeds, tax receipts, aerial maps, county parcel overlays. She also submitted a formal records request for the HOA's building permits, utility approvals, and every zoning variance they've been granted since the first home went up. By Friday, the HOA's lawyer had sent a cease and desist accusing me of harassing residents and trespassing. Carla read it once and laughed. They're bluffing. They're trying to scare you off before the county starts digging. And dig they did. A week later, a plainclothes investigator from the district attorney's office showed up at Carla's office. He introduced himself as Damon Cho and came in carrying a stack of files. Several documents submitted by the HOA reference a land purchase that never occurred, he said. It looks like someone forged a deed to get the initial building permits approved. Carla asked if he had names. Not yet, he said, but the forgery was notarized by someone who no longer works in the county clerk's office, and the notary stamp used had been retired 5 years before the documents were dated. I sat quietly processing that. This wasn't incompetence, it was a coordinated cover-up. Cho continued. The HOA also applied for federal infrastructure grants using the forged deed as proof of ownership. That's wire fraud. If this holds, we're looking at federal charges. What do you need from us? Carla asked. Anything that shows the HOA knowingly operated on land they didn't own. Emails, meeting minutes, witness statements from residents who were told the property was legally theirs. I stood up. I can get you some of those, I said. Some of them looked real uneasy when I showed up. That weekend, I hosted a barbecue. Not a covert meeting, a genuine, honest-to-God cookout. I sent flyers to every home in the subdivision, inviting people to meet the landowner and hear the truth. Most ignored it. About 20 people showed up, some out of curiosity, some out of concern. A retired firefighter named Anthony approached me by the grill. I always thought it was strange how fast this place went up, he said. Nobody ever talked about purchasing the land, just that it was part of some legacy development. I asked if he'd ever seen a deed when he bought his lot. He shook his head. We were told everything was handled by the HOA's developer. We just signed mortgage papers and moved in. I asked him if he'd be willing to talk to the investigator. He thought about it for a moment. If I'm living on stolen land, I want it made right. Yeah, I'll talk. By the end of the afternoon, we had 6 willing witnesses and a growing stack of personal testimony. Carla compiled everything and sent it off. The next week, the bomb dropped. The district attorney filed charges against 2 former county employees, one for forgery, one for bribery. The developer who built Crescent Ridge was indicted for wire fraud and conspiracy, and Deborah Van Holt was subpoenaed for knowingly submitting false documents. The subdivision went into panic mode. Emergency HOA meetings were called. A few houses went up for sale overnight. But the best part? The court ruled in our favor on the quiet title action. I was now the legally recognized owner of the entire 500 acres, including every square foot beneath their driveways. Carla called me the next morning. You've got options, she said. We can pursue back rent, negotiate new leases, or start eviction proceedings for the common areas. I told her I wanted accountability, not just money. She grinned. Then we start with the clubhouse. That afternoon, we served formal notice. The HOA's clubhouse, pool, and tennis courts sat on land not covered by any fraudulent permit. They had 30 days to either purchase a lease or vacate. That clubhouse was their crown jewel. Weekly wine tastings, holiday brunches, HOA elections. It was the beating heart of the little empire they'd built. And now, it was mine. The eviction notice set off a chain reaction faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, I was served with a countersuit. The HOA accusing me of unlawful interference with community assets and claiming the land beneath the clubhouse had been gifted to residents in perpetuity. Carla laughed so hard when she read it she nearly knocked over her coffee. "There's no record of any such gift," she said, flipping through the pages. "They're inventing legal fiction to stall. But look at who filed this, not their usual firm. It was a small practice that specialized in damage control for failing developers and political fixers. The kind of lawyers you call when you can't afford the truth coming out." Meanwhile, we had just received a court order granting us access to the HOA's financials for the last 10 years. And that was when things got genuinely interesting. I drove out to the property and let myself into the clubhouse with a spare key I found tucked behind a flower pot near the ramp. The place was spotless, too spotless. I started with the filing cabinets in the office. Everything alphabetized, labeled, color-coded. But the moment I opened the drawer marked vendor contracts, I knew something was off. The folders were pristine. The documents inside, dozens of them, had the same signature, same date, all in the same handwriting. Carla had warned me to look for exactly that. I photographed every page, especially the ones with inflated landscaping charges, some claiming up to $15,000 a month for decorative mulch layering and seasonal fountain calibration. Then I moved to the locked cabinet behind the desk. Cheap metal and the key from the flower pot worked just fine. Inside were 3 manila folders, one marked Millstone Dev, one labeled Permit Adjustments, the third simply titled DV. I opened that one first. Bank statements, personal, all belonging to Deborah van Holt. I flipped through them, pulse climbing. Transfers from the HOA's operating account into her own. Small at first, 200 here, 500 there, but growing over time. One deposit showed $22,000 labeled Special Assessment Overflow. She'd been skimming dues for years. I drove straight to Carla's office. She scanned the statements, her face hardening with each page. "She's cooked," she said. "These are unauthorized transfers. If we cross-reference these dates with HOA meeting minutes and budget approvals, we prove she siphoned community money into her personal accounts." But that wasn't all. The Millstone Dev folder contained email printouts between Deborah and a man named Roger Cleaner, former project manager for the original Subdivision developer. Most were encrypted, but some were clearly desperate. Talk of keeping things buried, ensuring old permit files stayed sealed. One message simply read, "If the county audits us, we're finished." Carla's eyes narrowed. "We need to bring this to Cho." That afternoon, we met with Investigator Cho at the district attorney's satellite office. He took the folders carefully, flipping through with a practiced eye. "This confirms what we suspected," he said. "Embezzlement, document falsification, coordinated cover-up with the developer. But the encrypted printouts, that might be evidence of racketeering." He left the room briefly. When he returned, a second man came with him, tall, square-jawed, a Department of Justice badge on his belt. Special Agent Marston. He was taking over the federal side of things. "We'll need a full list of everyone with financial access inside the HOA over the last decade," he said. "Also, anyone who signed off on those utility expansions." Carla handed him a flash drive. "Already sorted." The next day, federal subpoenas hit Crescent Ridge like a thunderclap. The HOA board was suspended. The clubhouse was sealed. Dues were frozen. News vans appeared at the gate. Reporters moved through the streets like something out of a documentary. I stayed out of sight that week and let Carla handle the public statements. The message was simple. The land was mine, and I was offering residents a fair path forward. Modest lease agreements on the lots beneath their homes. or negotiated buyouts, all handled transparently once the legal dust settled. The HOA's vice president, a man named Greg Penner, contacted Carla asking for a meeting. He said he'd had no idea about the forged permits or Deborah's schemes. Carla agreed, but only if I was present, and the meeting was recorded. We met downtown at a neutral office. Greg arrived looking like he hadn't slept in days, collar wrinkled, hands unsteady as he poured himself a glass of water. He said he'd joined the board 3 years earlier and that Deborah had handled all the early paperwork. He just signed off on what she put in front of him. Carla leaned forward. Then why did you approve a motion to increase dues last year to cover legacy land taxes? He flinched. She said we owed back payments to the county. I didn't check. I should have. Carla told him plainly he was likely facing state-level charges, but if he could prove he wasn't part of the original fraud and was willing to testify, immunity was possible. He nodded slowly. I'll cooperate. 2 weeks later, Deborah Van Holt was arrested outside her gym, cuffed in broad daylight, designer sunglasses and tennis skirt and all. Residents stood on their porches and filmed it. Some cheered. Others watched in stunned silence. Charged with embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Denied bail. The developer, Roger Clean, fled the state but was picked up in Nevada trying to board a private plane. Federal charges followed within days. While all of this unfolded, something unexpected started happening inside Crescent Ridge. The fear and the anger began to settle, and in their place, something quieter took root. Most residents stayed. They came to the town hall meetings Carla and I hosted, where we laid out new lease options and offered the kind of transparency they had never once received under the HOA. At one of these meetings, an elementary school teacher named Denise stood up. I paid into this community for 6 years, she said. I didn't know any of this. But now that we do, I think we should start fresh. No HOA, just a neighborhood. The room murmured in agreement. Carla stepped to the mic and explained that under state law, if 75% of homeowners voted to dissolve the HOA, it could be done. And since the HOA had never had legal standing to begin with, they were in a better position than most to make it happen. By the end of the month, they had the votes. Crescent Ridge HOA was dissolved. I established a land trust through Carla's office that allowed residents to lease their lots at a nominal rate while maintaining full legal rights to their homes. The money collected went towards shared infrastructure, roads, water lines, maintenance, managed through a transparent community board elected annually. No secret meetings, no surprise assessments, no fines for the color of your mailbox. Just neighbors looking out for each other. Then Carla called before sunrise one morning, voice clipped and low. We've got a problem. The forensic audit had turned up a buried expense trail. Crescent Ridge HOA had been funneling money into a shell company that didn't exist in any state registry. Close to $500,000 over 7 years, labeled as contracted utility services with no matching provider, no tax ID, no contracts. Just wire transfers to an offshore intermediary in the Cayman Islands. We're past mismanagement, Carla said. This is laundering. Federal financial crimes agents were back on site by noon. Agent Marston told us Deborah and Clenny hadn't just been skimming dues. They were using Crescent Ridge to wash money from other real estate deals. At least 3 other subdivisions in the state showed similar patterns. And one of the decrypted email chains mentioned a payoff to the zoning inspector who had signed off on the original Crescent Ridge site plan. That inspector had recently retired and taken a consulting job with a private developer whose name kept appearing in the shell company accounts. Then the intimidation started. Carla's office was broken into, nothing stolen but furniture overturned and bleach poured on her files. My mailbox was ripped open and stuffed with shredded photos of my workshop. One resident found her tires slashed and a note under the wiper, "Stay quiet." We reported everything and Marston had protection details assigned. That same week, Anthony flagged me down at the southern edge of the property. Someone in an Armani suit had come by his house asking if he'd consider selling his lot back to the HOA. When Anthony reminded the man there was no more HOA, the guy handed him a business card and left. The card was white, blank on one side. On the back, a single word embossed in silver: Millstone. They're testing the waters, I told Anthony, seeing who they can intimidate before the feds close in. He shook his head. They picked the wrong neighborhood. Carla and I filed an emergency petition with the county to suspend all land development permits tied to Millstone Development Group. We attached the offshore wire data, the shell company registration trail, and copies of the decrypted emails. Within 48 hours, the county commission froze Millstone's applications and opened a formal inquiry. Then Roger Cleaney flipped. He cut a deal, reduced sentence, witness protection, and started naming everyone: county officials, developers, a city councilman who had shepherded zoning changes in exchange for kickbacks. Cho told me Cleaney said he'd been told that if he ever talked, they'd bury him in a foundation pour. His testimony was enough for a RICO indictment: Millstone's CEO, 2 former county employees, and a dozen contractors. The dawn raid on Millstone's headquarters made the evening news. Executives in handcuffs, laptops seized, offices taped off. Residents who had been wary of me for months were now dropping sandwiches and thank you cards at Carla's office. One woman brought over a hand-knitted quilt with the words "Truth Prevails" stitched across it. There was one loose thread remaining: the utility lot at the southern edge of the property, the one with the generator shed and security cameras, had been stonewalled by the county utility board for months, citing safety protocols. After the indictments, those barriers disappeared overnight. When we finally got inside with federal agents, we found more than generators. Behind a false wall in the shed was a narrow stairwell leading to a concrete room lined with filing cabinets and hard drives connected to a dormant local server. Marston's tech team pulled the contents within hours. The server held encrypted land surveys, alternate permit drafts, and a cache of internal memos from Millstone's founders. What those memos showed was the original intent spelled out in plain language. They had deliberately built Crescent Ridge on Jasper Maddox's land because it wasn't under active development. They expected Jasper to die without heirs. They planned to claim adverse possession within 10 years. They never counted on me. The final memo was dated 2 months before Deborah's arrest. If the Maddox heir won't sell, pressure him. If he resists, bury him in litigation until he folds. We've done it before. That was their blueprint. Build fast, forge the documents, silence opposition through legal exhaustion or outright intimidation. They hadn't just stolen land. They had built a network on threats, lies, and backroom arrangements. And they had done it before, in at least 5 other subdivisions across the state, with 39 defendants eventually named in the RICO case. The trials would take years, but the operation was finished. Back in Crescent Ridge, things were different. The old HOA board was gone. The clubhouse had been converted into a genuine community center, open to everyone, no dues required. Residents volunteered to maintain the park and trails and manage the shared infrastructure fund through a rotating committee. At the first spring festival, held on the old golf course, I walked the grounds with Carla, watching kids run between food trucks and balloon artists while a local band played classic rock from a makeshift stage. "You ever think it would end like this?" Carla asked. "Not once," I said. "I expected lawsuits and headaches. I didn't expect community." She looked around at what had grown up in the space where the HOA used to be. "You gave them more than land," she said. "You gave them a way forward." I shook my head. "They built it themselves. I just gave them the space." One crisp morning a few weeks later, I heard gravel crunch in my driveway and stepped out to find Anthony getting out of his truck with a box under his arm. "Got something for you," he said, handing it over, "from the residents." Inside was a plaque, hand-carved in solid oak. "Xavier Maddox, the man who stood his ground." I didn't need anything flashy. That was enough. Later that evening, I drove out to the northern ridge and stood at the edge overlooking the houses below. Porch lights twinkling, laughter drifting up on the wind. The land quiet, settled, finally right. They had tried to steal it, bury it in lies, and build their empire on its back.
They had planned for every contingency, except one ordinary man inheriting what his uncle left him and deciding he wasn't going to let it go without a fight. Now they were paying rent, and a whole lot more than that. And from up on that ridge, the land felt like exactly what it had always been. Mine.